Morning YouTube, this is Bov Break Down Part 2. Thanks to all the people that have inquired, you know, kind of where we were and if it worked and how we were getting on. All of the jobs that we did last time are sound and of use. Obviously it makes the engine in a lot better condition, but unfortunately we didn't get away with it. So the car overheated for a reason, and if I was to have made the kind of major repair without sorting out the cause, it would simply have happened again. So I always suspected that the repair that we did last time may not be the conclusion of it, but now we know that the thermostat's okay, the water pump's okay, the radiator's okay, all the hoses are okay, we haven't got any leaks, so the cooling system in this truck is as tickety-boo as we could probably make it. But the definitive diagnosis is that we have engine gases in the cooling system, and the diagnosis for that is that we have a blown head gasket. So very simply, what I'm going to do today is take the cylinder head, which is pretty much the top of the engine, off, and everything has to be kind of unbolted and lifted away, pretty much leaving the cylinder block. And the cylinder block is what actually has the pistons in it that drives the engine, gives you the combustion, the explosion in the chamber, and moves your vehicle. So the cylinder head in this vehicle is aluminium and the cylinder block is cast iron, and between them there's a very thick gasket. And if you think about maybe a piece of lino or a mat, shall we say, that separates the two parts and gives you an airtight, watertight seal in the middle of your engine. Well, that little gasket, I think, is what is damaged, and we won't actually know until we get it out. So when I sort of turned to people and said, we're going to turn the key, will it start? Well, the answer to that is yes, it would. And so, like most of us, it always sounds a bit lumpy first thing in the morning, but as soon as she gets a little bit warmer, she kind of settles down. The engine sounds great, you know, there are no sort of crashes and bangs and loud noises coming from the top or bottom of the engine. So the 300 TDI engine, you know, they've been doing adventure overlanding around the world for, you know, 50 or 60 years. So this particular truck, I think, is profoundly reliable. This is quite a big job. What I'm going to do as soon as it warms up is I'll show you how I made my definitive diagnosis that we have a blown head gasket. What happens is as the pressure in the engine builds up, this is the expansion tank. So as the water in the cooling system heats up, it expands, and the excess pressure is taken up by this tank. Now when you open this tank, when you've got a blown head gasket, what happens is this. So you get exhaust gases coming out of the expansion tank or the radiator. Now there is a device that you can buy. Very simply, it's like a very large hypodermic syringe, and it's got chemicals in it, and all you do is you just place it in the top, the chemicals change colour, it means you've got exhaust gases in the cooling system, which tells you that you've got a blown head gasket. As I can see here, I've got kind of vapour coming out of the expansion tank, but it also smells of diesel and exhaust fumes. So that's as complicated as the diagnosis is. Today what I'm going to do is strip off the cylinder head of a 300 TDI engine. I guess you're going to share it with me. Okay, so we've got to redo a couple of the jobs that we finished off with last time. I've got to drop the oil out of the engine, and I've got to drain the coolant. But because I've just changed the oil in this vehicle, obviously I'm not going to dispose of it. I'm going to show you a little trick where I'm literally just going to drain the oil in this truck, leave it on the ground underneath the vehicle until the job you know, gets to a stage where we're going to put it back. And it's the same with the coolant really. I'm going to drain the coolant into a bucket because we've just put brand new coolant into it, and when we're ready, you know, those products are going to go straight back into the engine. Okay, so I know that my engine takes about 6 litres. This is a 6 litre oil pan, and from when we drain the oil there is residue of old engine oil in this pan. And obviously we're going to drop the brand new engine oil that we've recently put in there out. So obviously we don't want any contamination, and we don't want, you know, little bits and pieces of kind of I'll show you the pan, kind of debris or bits and pieces. We could clean it, but the last thing I want to do first thing in the morning is start getting detergent out and getting waste engine oil all over me. So what I do is I get an old garbage bag, an old refuse bag, put it in the oil pan, and this is where we're going to drop our clean oil into. And obviously this is going to keep it pristine, you know, clean and ready to go back into the engine. So that's what I'm going to do with the oil pan. I'm also going to do the same with an old box I've got, which I'm going to drop the coolant out of the engine into also. And like I say, once it's in the bag gets transferred to kind of an oil can, a can that we can then put it back into the vehicle with. But these are the first 2 jobs: drop the oil and drain out the water from the cooling system. So anyone that's watched my little films before knows that what I do, especially first thing in the morning, is I always put on 2 pairs of gloves. And all that happens is I guarantee you'll be halfway through this job and a phone will ring or something will happen. You know, maybe someone comes to the front door or whatever it is. So one of the delays in me starting this job really was waiting for things to turn up, so I've had to buy some tools. This little gadget is a torque angle gauge. So once we've tightened the bolts in the engine up to what's called a torque setting, which just is a measurement of tightness really. Once you've got them to the right tightness, you then have to rotate them through a certain amount of degrees to sort of extra or over tighten them. So this is a torque setting gauge. That was something that I didn't have in my toolbox and had to buy. Some of my subscribers, I was talking about how I had bolts in the engine that had kind of rounded off and that I couldn't get open. Bear in mind, lots of the nuts and bolts on this truck are over 20 years old and 140,000 miles of all sorts of weather. People recommended these for getting rounded bolts and nuts off, and thank you very much, I went out and bought a little set. The other thing, I wasn't too sure about my feeler gauges. I've had them a long time, so I replaced those. We're going to be measuring tolerances on the top of the cylinder head to within between 2 and 4 thousandths of an inch, and to do that we need feeder gauges. So there are a couple of bits and pieces that I had to buy in order to get the job done. Okay, so that's the engine oil dropped out. Like I say, it's in that container under the truck. What I've done is gathered the bag up around the 6 litre draining bowl, and then just put a twizz in the top so I don't get any dust or contaminants in the engine oil. I'm really just going to leave it under the truck out of the way until I'm ready to put it back in. So I'm starting to strip it all off. I'm taking the hoses off again just because it gives me a little bit more room to work around the engine. Last time I didn't change the oil kind of cooler. This sort of takes up oil vapour really, or fumes, and it just filters it and feeds it back into the rocker cover. So I didn't change that last time. Don't know how long it's been on there, so a new one of those has turned up. Just ready to take the rocker cover off. So when you're stripping things out, just try to be aware that, you know, some washers, gaskets will kind of come out with the bolts, you know, whereas others won't. So it's an ideal opportunity to clean up the rocker cover, to put a new gasket on it, and just to make sure that all of your fixings, nuts and bolts, you know, are all in good order. So it's literally a 20-second job to just replace these while all this stuff is out, and it just costs pennies. So this is your best friend when it comes to 20-year-old nuts and bolts. Drop of what's called penetrating oil, but if you haven't got any kind of purpose made penetrating oil, then WD-40, but leave it on there for sort of 10 or 15 minutes. Give it a couple of sprays before you start to undo these nuts and bolts that have obviously been on there for a good maybe 10 to 20 years plus. So a little drop of penetrating oil before you get a big pry bar on there and undo them. It just might save you an awful lot of ag if one of them snaps. Okay, so not completely unexpected, there's 2 bolts in the top of the manifold, but there's also one underneath the bottom centre, which was an absolute nightmare to get out. It took me about an hour just to undo one bolt, but we're pretty much here. So we are ready to take the rockers out, and they're all on this sort of this centre spindle. And there's a bit of a trick really. If you can lift it out in one piece, and then these bolts here, you know, maybe sort of keep hold of it, put it on the table, and have a beautiful assistant to slip a couple of bolts through both ends, it kind of holds it all in place. So makes putting it back an awful lot easier. Okay, so I managed to get it out. These are the retaining bolts that I've put in. I've put the bolts in, and what I've done is just put plumbing washers, one on the top, one on the bottom, just a small nut. Done the same at the other end, just to kind of hold it all in place, so when it comes to reassembling it, it should go straight back in a lot easier. Obviously we have to make sure that it's the right way around. Apart from that, all good, nothing bad. That's the other trick. I've spent about an hour reading the book this morning as well, so if you haven't got a owner's manual, that's probably the best 10 quid you could ever spend. Okay, this part is imperative really. What I've got here is just a piece of cardboard marked front for front of the engine, drilled 8 holes, and as I take out the rods, push them through a hole, and they go back in the engine in exactly the same hole that they came out of. Now what I'm going to do is put these somewhere safe where they're not going to get scratched or damaged or contaminated, ready for going straight back in the engine. Okay, so if there really is a crucial part of removing a cylinder head and checking the head gasket, it's undoing the bolts that hold it in place. So there's a specific order, as you can see on the diagram, and they have to be undone in a set order, and they have to be done up in a set order. If you don't, what happens is you stand a chance of physically warping the head of the cylinder block yourself. So the bolts are torqued up to a certain setting and then rotated through an additional sort of 40 degrees, but we'll look at all that when we come around to putting it back on. But they've obviously got to be taken off in exactly the same order, so you've seen the diagram, so that's the way we'll be loosening these bolts off. So I'm using a thing called a breaker bar, which just gives you a little bit more leverage. If you've got enough leverage, you could move the wheel. If you're using a breaker bar, it's always a good idea to pull it towards you. So I'm going to go through what I think is 18 bolts in order, loosen them all off, and then I'll whiz them all out. But that's the idea. Make sure you check the manual. That's all of the bolts loosened in sequence as per the diagram. Now what I'm going to do is just whiz them all out. The bolts are different sizes and they're going to be replaced with new ones before they go back, but we need to remember where different size bolts go. So I'm just going to mark up 3 bolts. So this is the longest bolt that comes out of the cylinder head. I put a black bit of tape around the collar of that bolt, and I put a black bit of tape over the hole. The next length bolt I'll do the same again, only with blue tape. So I put a piece of blue tape around the bolt and a piece of blue tape over the hole in the cylinder head that it comes out of, and the last bolt won't have a piece of tape on it at all. So I'm just trying to mark up the right length bolt for the right port for when we bolt it all back together. So there's my little system with the bolts. Blue bolts are one length and black bolts are another, but it's also stopping debris falling into the hole and then giving me trouble threading the new bolts in there. So it's a double whammy really. They're colour coded and it's stopping any debris falling in the hole. Wow, okay, so that's the head cylinder off. Now we've got to spend a little bit of time cleaning it up, replacing the gaskets, giving it a good once over, and see where the head gasket is leaking, if it's leaking at all, and examine the head for any damage, cracks, corrosion. So once we've got a little bit of cleaning fluid on there, we'll have a better idea as to what it's going to take to repair it. Gonna have a cup of tea, bit of lunch, back soon.